This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, in fact, Pete in Stamford has said it out loud. He's written, "Morning, James. This will be an easy morning's work for you, mate. Get listeners to phone in and talk about a topic you've got no idea about. What an easy life. Good skills. Have a great day." Cheers, Pete. I take your point. But that's not fair. I mean, this is actually, I think, the best way to approach a political debate on television is for a radio host to present a programme from a position of complete ignorance. I know what you're thinking. You do that every day, James. But on this morning, my ignorance is complete. I didn't watch it. I've barely seen any clips. I mean, they're quite hard to avoid, to be honest. I can see Julie Etchingham at the moment looking like she's conducting a séance. She's got her eyes closed and she's waving her arm up and down. Seriously, spirits, are you there? Are you there? That means that when I ask you, what happened? What did you see? Say what you see. In the immortal words of Roy Walker, say what you see and tell me what went on. I should probably flesh that question out a little more. It'd be unprofessional not to. But what I'm looking for is, I mean, I can't do this phone-in for reasons that will become pretty clear when I tell you what it is. I can't do a phone-in saying, did anybody change their mind as a consequence of watching that debate? Because I don't think anybody did. It seems to me highly unlikely that anybody's needle would be nudged sufficiently to actively prompt a change in voting intentions unless something extraordinary happened. Something extraordinary has happened the next day. This letter from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury is unprecedented. The letter that has been sent in direct response to some of the things that, in fact, Labour have had it for a couple of days. Tom Swarbrick on Twitter this morning, very pertinently, wondering why Labour didn't bring it up last night. Did they not know they had it? Had it got lost in the post, perhaps? Did they not realise the significance of what they had in front of them? A Prime Minister and today the Chief Secretary, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, as opposed to the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury who wrote the letter. Very confusing. Both claiming that these numbers they used were based on civil service calculations, and you now have a very senior civil servant saying it's absolutely not the case. It's absolutely not true. Headline writers have to tread very, very carefully, and I don't. So Labour accusing the Tories of lying is how you would frame it as a news headline, but actually it's not really Labour doing the accusing. It's the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, and if he's not qualified to say that they're lying, then who is? Because it is to him that these politicians have been appealing. I'm never comfortable with criticism. Well, that's not true, is it? It depends who it is. I'm largely never comfortable with criticism of other broadcasters. I just always feel. How would you feel if you turned on the telly or turned on the radio and someone was giving you a shoeing? But early responses suggest that the host last night, Julie Etchingham, rather lost control of the debate. Keith puts it thus: "I saw Julie Etchingham lose control of the debate, and we are all the worse for it." A quick word on this, actually. It's almost impossible to stop someone talking on a live television programme. So we probably need an example of Sunak. We probably need an example of Sunak, this bit where he refused to stop talking. Don't you hate people that talk over others and interrupt a lot? I mean, isn't that an appalling habit? Thank goodness me. How would you deal with somebody in that category? But I'll tell you a story briefly, 7 after 10. I think I've got time. So I presented a programme a million years ago called Central Weekend Live. It was one of my first ever television gigs. Do you know who the other two presenters of that programme were? I could almost do a hook and tease here. It's quite extraordinary the paths that the three of us have followed, considering that at the time we were relatively obscure broadcasters, or in my case, pretty much a wannabe broadcaster, and at the very, very earliest days of our careers. But the three presenters of that program, I'll tease you a bit. Actually, I'm not going to tell you who the other two were for a moment or two. But it was one of those late night debate shows. Do you remember them? Nicky Campbell used to get most of the presenting gigs, quite rightly. He's a master of the genre, but it would be quite fiery. I think they even served alcohol in the green room before the cameras started rolling. And it was sort of almost pub chucking out time, this programme. And you'd have like classic debates, like about abortion or the death penalty, or old school hanging, old school tabloidy debates. And I think it was possibly my first ever go at it. I didn't have an agent at the time. I don't have an agent now. I've never had an agent really, but I sometimes wonder whether I should have done. I just said yes. They rang up, said, "Do you fancy doing this?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." So I got headed over to Nottingham. I was working in Norwich at the time. Got a car all the way from Norwich to Nottingham. Turned up, went through the programme notes. I get list of guests. Who's doing this? Who's doing that? On you go. Can't even remember what the subject was. Fox hunting, possibly, something like that. And as we're headed towards the commercial break, you've got a person in your ear saying, "Okay, wrap it up now. Wrap it up now." And this bloke wouldn't shut up. I said, thank you, sir. That's great. That's fine. Right, okay. And the producer's going, "No, you really got to wrap it up now. We're going to the break. And the bloke's still banging on. He's giving it, yeah, that bad. And then they start the countdown. So what do you do when they actually start the countdown in your ear? It's not as if you've got options. You're going to literally hit the commercial break, hit the boom boom moment mid rant. That's quite a good description. Emma said, I watched that programme. It was Twitter in human form. Yes, and I don't have the power to cut the mic. That's the other problem, because I'm the presenter. I suppose they could do it from the gallery, but that would just sound really weird because you'd suddenly have silence. So I kind of sat on him. So the camera follows me around the studio, right? It's one of those roving, I don't know why I'm moving that. Well, yes, for the people watching on YouTube, and my chair's on wheels. So I'm doing quite a bit like, what is it, Stavros or Davros in the Daleks? It's Davos. Davos, is it? A bit like that at the moment. I'm like a sort of seated Dalek on my wheelie chair. And the camera's following me around the studio like this. And the bloke is here talking, and I'm talking to him. But in order to so I have to get myself between him and the camera, and I sort of bend down a little bit to almost sit on his knee to just shut him out completely as I say, and we'll be back after this. And I don't think Julie Etchingham could have done that to Rishi Sunak. I think it would have been very inappropriate for her to sort of sit on Rishi Sunak's knee, or eclipse him, blot him out in any way, really. In the studio. So that's why criticising the presenter for, quotes, losing control or, end quotes, is probably not fair. Davros. It's not Stavros or Davos, it's Davros, apparently. Thank you. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. So what happened? What went on? Imagine that you're talking to someone who didn't watch it. No, you don't actually have to imagine that. You are talking to someone who didn't watch it, who possibly wouldn't even have watched it. Well, no, of course I'd have watched it if I was at home. Certainly the first one. I think it might even be the only one. I've got a selection of clips in front of me on a piece of paper. We can have a little check up on stuff. But I want you to tell me what happened. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I want you to tell me what you took away from it. And I can't in any way confect a context in which we are all objective. The Sun's polling is the only one that doesn't try to weight it for previous preconceptions. So the Sun's polling is the one that doesn't sort of balance out according to what you thought before it started. And they've got Starmer 20 points ahead. But that's a reflection in many ways of where he was before the debate started. So it means, according to that polling, there's one that's got Sunak a little bit ahead, and there's one that's got Starmer a little bit ahead. The right-wing media, because they betrayed the British public and abandoned reality quite a long time ago, have got Rishi Sunak almost sort of performing a Mike Tyson-style knockout of Keir Starmer. Starmer on the ropes over tax, claims the Daily Telegraph. Fiery Rishi comes out swinging and lands big blows, claims the Daily Mail. But I think that those newspapers, and the Express, no doubt. Kapow! Feisty Rishi floors Starmer over £2,000 tax rise. So one wonders whether the Daily Express will be telling its readers tomorrow that kapow was a complete lie. As has subsequently emerged. An extraordinary moment that we'll look into in more detail later, because I do want to begin with the overview, with the big picture. And And the phone lines are now open. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Let's have a look at some early texts, just to set the scene, if you like. Ruby says, I can only surmise what your first topic will be this morning, but I guess it's pretty obvious who won the debate. James, Sunak didn't win, Starmer didn't win, the Conservatives didn't win, Labour didn't win. Be assured, James, we all lose and we all keep losing. There was nothing inspirational from either person. Why do we allow ourselves to suffer so horribly and put up with this level of incompetence and downright lies? So that's a cheery start to proceedings. Milan writes, I think Rishi needs to be taught how not to talk over someone. He's not the only one. Whenever he is on the receiving end, he starts talking over people and doesn't let anyone explain it. It can get very, very frustrating to listen to. By the way, I didn't watch all of it, but the highlight I saw on the morning news where Rishi was talking over the host, as well as repeating the same thing again and again, just sounded like a spoilt child. I watched the debate, says Gavin, and frankly, I'm now equally depressed and concerned. Should the Prime Minister be allowed to lie repeatedly on national TV and get away with it? I don't know that the claim had been proven to be a lie at the time where it happened, Gavin. So I presume now any moderator or presenter hearing a Tory claim that these figures, this £2,000 figure, has been assembled by independent civil servants, the presenter will step in and say, you lied. Gavin adds, having read your latest book, it seems to me that we're not learning from past mistakes. Well, we are going to look at that a little later, that very specific issue, and I think unprecedented issue of a Prime Minister and a Chief Secretary to the Treasury knowingly selling the British public complete porkies about the opposition party's economic plans. So let's kick things off, right? What did you see? What did you make of it? You can just give me a review, either from the aesthetic side of things as a piece of television, or of course politically. What did you learn about either candidate? What did you like about either candidate? What did you dislike about either candidate? What did you think of the programme in general? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 10 is the time. The two men who would be Prime Minister, one of whom will, extraordinary events notwithstanding, one of these two men will be Prime Minister early next month, about almost a month to the day, actually, from today. And apart from PMQs, which is, I think we could all agree, often an unedifying spectacle, apart from PMQs, this is the first time that we have had, or you have had, the opportunity to properly cast a rule over them as both public performers and as men. Just ordinary men. We're just innocent men. I want to know what you made of it all. Let's start with Lauren, who's in Havant. Lauren, what would you like to say?
Hello, James
Hello,
O'Brien.
Lauren. Hello, Lauren. Lauren.
A long-time listener, first time I've got through.
Welcome.
Hi. I watched the whole debate.
Well done.
I know. It was really frustrating to watch. What I came away with was the difference in the characters of the men.
Yes.
Keir Starmer was very gentlemanly and very respectful of debate and the rules of debate, and respectful to the chair. Rishi Sunak was a spoiled, entitled public schoolboy who just kept on.
Hang on a minute. What's wrong with spoiled? What's wrong with spoiled, entitled public schoolboys?
Well, I think in that situation,
yes,
he was just desperate to overtalk. But I think you asked, what did I come away with? And I think the most important thing that I came away with, and I think the most important thing, is Keir Starmer looked directly in the camera at the end of the debate in his little short speech he got to make at the end.
Yes. And
he said, imagine waking up on July the 5th and they've got in for another 5 years. And I think that is what everybody needs to think on, and just hold on to that. But he's a gentleman, and he is obviously, he's a bit too timid for my liking, but I do think that...
And that came across last night, did it? That's not just something you thought already. You thought there was because what you've done there is fascinating, because you said gentlemanly, which is a positive, isn't it? That's a warm word to use. But then you've talked of timidity, which is probably a negative. That's a less warm or a cool word to use. And yet you're using both words to describe the same thing, aren't you?
Yes, it's because I think that I'm much fierier person. So I wouldn't have been able. I mean, I don't get through because I think Eleanor sort of can read me.
This is my producer, Eleanor. So we've gone from critiquing last night's programme. I'm a little uncomfortable about Julie Etchingham coming in for some criticism, but you've decided to go for the producer's throat on the first call of the morning.
No, I'm actually self-depreciating because
I'm here for it.
Normally, when I ring you, it's because I'm irate about something.
Oh, I see. And you think Eleanor concludes that you're too angry to come on air, and you may turn the airwaves blue.
Yeah, I might cry sometimes.
But it is the same thing. Timidity and gentlemanliness are the same thing, and you can see them depending on how you're feeling. Almost, they can be either positive or negative depending on the context.
He was politer with the chair, not over-talking the chair.
Okay, we're going to have a look at that.
Possibly been.
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, I've got some examples of Rishi Sunak being, they're random actually. We've got 3 apparently. I haven't got any idea what order they're in or what bits they are. So let's listen to the first one.
You might not like it, but I've got a plan because we've got to have a deterrent. What are you going to do? Just tell everybody. What are you going to do with illegal migrants who arrive?
Please, please, gentlemen.
Okay, let's have another.
The big problem with Liz Truss is that she made unfunded tax cuts.
All right.
The Prime Minister is doing the same thing.
Okay.
We're going to go round the circle again.
Everyone's because you asked you.
Okay.
Why is he doing it on that second one? Anyway, let's say the third time lucky.
Prime Minister just keeps saying he lives in a different world. That
if people are struggling with their bills, why do you want to make it harder for them?
Okay, I mean that is just difficult. That's context. I don't know whether Sunak is punching. He sort of, they've got him all pepped up before he went in, and he's swinging at them, or whether there is a sort of obnoxiousness there that Lauren describes as a sort of entitled public school boy demeanour. Something that I am quite obviously quite familiar with. Thank you, Lauren. Philo or Philo?
Philo, James.
Philo. Sorry, Philo. Not like the pastry there. Well, a bit like the pastry.
It's sometimes philo, sometimes philo. It doesn't really matter.
Well, actually, you'll always be philo to me. What would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say something about the £2,000 load of hogwash from last night. Because I think, I should confess this, I'm a recently retired lawyer.
Are you enjoying your retirement, Philo?
I'm moving house as well.
Oh, Lordy. Okay, no, well, let's give it a while. Let's give it a month and then ask you again.
I think Starmer absolutely knew before the debate about the Bowler letter and what it said, and took a deliberate decision, which he's done before. I'll give you the example. I think he just let Sunak repeat it over and over and over again, effectively let him hang himself with it.
Yeah.
Because now the letter's come out this morning, the Bowler letter.
That's interesting.
And now Labour can say, look, they are proven liars. So
it's more of a zinger this morning than it would have been if he'd pulled it out of his pocket last night.
He looked, maybe to certain people last night, he looked like he didn't have the ammunition to immediately rebut the £2,000 allegation. And certainly some people have been saying that. But I think it was more than that. He knew, and it's a lawyerly tactic, James. We all do it. But he did it. He used to do it, particularly with Johnson. Now I can't remember which particular lie Johnson was spouting at the different dispatches, because there were so many.
I mean, it would have been to do with the parties, I think, probably.
But he presented some evidence which didn't stack up to an incontrovertible case.
Yeah.
But he knew it was going to. And his words, his zinger response when Johnson repeated it yet again was, I'll just let that lie there for now.
Or we'll just leave it there. I remember that.
Yeah.
Something like that. And everyone said at the time, I remember thinking, ooh,
so now,
he knows.
All the problems the Tories have got, they've now got the problem that whenever they try and throw tax muck at Labour, all Labour has to do is turn around and look and say they're proven liars. They're lying to you, as well as having put up tax to the highest it's been for 70 years.
Do you want... This is that's a brilliant analysis, but extraordinarily... 10:23, just before or just as you started speaking, Andrew in Leeds sent me this. Said it wasn't the best debate, James, but hindsight is amazing. I think we watched one of the best prosecutors in the land let the defendant repeatedly put himself into hot water and then subsequently pull out the document that shows he's been lying all along.
Yeah. I mean, it's what Jason Casey is doing in the Post Office inquiry.
Yes.
He settles down a witness, lets them feel comfortable, gets them to confirm various things, and then bosh, out comes the document which shows they're lying. And I think that's what Starmer was doing last night.
Well, the evidence is certainly on your side, isn't it, at the moment? And the crucial line, for people who haven't read the letter that James Bowler, the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, has sent to the Labour Party, the crucial line is, I have reminded ministers and advisers that this should be the case. So essentially they have all been told, up to and including Rishi Sunak, that they can't claim that this £2,000 figure was calculated by independent civil servants. And
it was trotted out this morning again by Claire Clueless Coutinho.
Yes. Is that her darts name?
Well, but, you know, I tried to say it was Labour's figures. It wasn't. All the inputs were going into it. And they, like you've just said, James, they were told that they could not say that.
How interesting.
And yet they ignored that.
Well, I think
You remember that one of Sunak's boasts when he took over as the however many Conservative Prime Ministers he is now, was that his government was going to be one of integrity. Well, that's rather blown up in his face, isn't it?
It's not just integrity, but professionalism and accountability as well.
Well, integrity is the most appropriate for this particular...
It certainly is. Well, accountability is kicking in pretty hard because we're going to have to see how they respond to the evidence that they were lying, that he was lying through his teeth last night.
They'll just ignore it.
Yes,
they'll change the subject.
Probably right. They'll try to.
There isn't any way. They're not going to say we lied, are they?
No. I think we can all agree about that.
And to say anything else, you can't say anything else because they did lie, and we know they lie.
Yeah. No, well, I think your legal perspective on this is invaluable, and your precedent as well, providing the previous examples of them having done it. I can't see a better analysis of that very specific element of the entire conversation. And if broadcast media is in purdah, of course, at the moment. The print media isn't. But if this is reported properly and widely, as Thomas's bulletin has it at the very top at the moment, then this is actually going to have a longer tail than anybody expected. It's going to, as you say, it's going to be popping up in every exchange.
And maybe you have to be a lawyer to recognise this. I'm not trying to sort of like pull a fast one or anything. But
no, you're not. I think you probably do.
Starmer, when Starmer's deploying this tactic, his expression on his face changes, and I can tell what he's doing.
Well, that's courtroom.
I can tell what he's doing.
That's courtroom tactics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mimi's been in touch. Mimi just tweeted to say, I bet Philo was a good lawyer. Isn't that nice?
Well, to go back to your question about how I enjoy my retirement, one of the things I did, I've kept all my books about proper things and life and
lovely
and stuff, but I have junked every single legal book I've ever owned.
That's it. It's the good days, the good times lie ahead. Well, good luck with everything, Philo, seriously, and thank you for taking a moment out of that packed schedule to enlighten us. Elephant trap is probably the word that a non-lawyer would use, and it would appear that Rishi Sunak has jumped straight into it. So, in fact, what looked like a mistake and posed questions. I mentioned Tom asking this question earlier today about why did they sit on it? Why did they leave it? Under Philo's analysis, and I think now, because she was so persuasive under mine, this was actually a repeat of that tactic he used on Johnson. Let's just leave it there. Look, here's an enormous amount of rope, Rishi Sunak. What are you going to do with it? It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. It's a little bit Chuckle Brothers, this one. To me, to you, to me, to you, to me, to you, because whether or not Starmer has done a very clever sort of lawyerly pivot here, or whether it is a mistake not to have hit Sunak with this letter last night in the middle of the debate, is being quite heatedly discussed in sort of political corners. Theo Usherwood, of course, formerly of this parish, he has contended that it is indeed a brilliant elephant trap, and whoever was responsible for coming up with the idea deserves kudos, whereas Harry York of the Sunday Times responds, not a chance. The impact of Starmer quoting that letter as a direct rebuttal during the debate would have been devastating and shut down Sunak's main line immediately. I don't know. And not just because I didn't watch it, but I was taken completely with Philo's analysis. But Harry York there, the deputy political editor of the Sunday Times, and alongside his colleague Gabriel Pogrund, responsible for pretty much all of the best scoops of the last couple of years from Westminster, makes a valid case as well. At the moment, I lean towards Philo's analysis. I lean towards it being another example of that moment in the House of Commons where Keir Starmer let Boris Johnson spool out, as it were, and then said, OK, right, well, we'll just leave that there then. And that, I think, was one of the statements by Johnson in the House that subsequently turned out to be contempt of Parliament, because it was indeed a barefaced lie. So I'm 52-48 on this one. I don't know where that number comes from. I just, it sort of has a nice ring to it. 52-48 on that one. 52% of me thinks it was indeed a loyally flourish. That's a nice phrase, isn't it? And 48% of me thinks maybe something's gone a little bit wrong there. Idiot's Corner. We've got an Idiot's Corner already, which is great, really, considering it's not really necessarily territory that lends itself immediately to Idiot's Corner. Simon has written in to say, you just admitted that you watched the debate. If you are going to lie, then write it down. You probably don't deserve this, Simon, but I've spent at least 30 seconds thinking about your message, and I think you must be referring to when I talked about what Keir Starmer saying, oh, we'll just leave it there then, in the House of Commons about 4 years ago. So that's not really what you would call Columbo-level evidence that I secretly watched the debate last night while also sitting in the Bloomsbury Ballroom for a wonderful event, and you somehow think that I'm gaining something from anyway. Idiot's Corner it is for you. Don't forget to turn the lights on your way in. 10:36 is the time. Couple of phone lines free. What did you make of last night's debate? Anything, actually. The individuals, the context, the medium, the content. Anthony's in Whaley Bridge. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I found it all a bit depressing, to be honest.
Yes, that's reasonable, I think.
And actually really quite concerning So I'm in my early 30s,
right,
and I think that events like this is part of the reason why many, many young people stay away from politics.
Go on, tell me more.
Well, when the debate was happening, especially in the first 15 minutes, they were talking over each other. There was no respect whatsoever, and it just, you couldn't trust anything anyone said.
Right.
And the fact that there's no fact checkers there, the fact that
that's mad, isn't it? So because that is quite a generational observation. Your generation is used to fact checkers. In many other contexts, you would just see it. It will pop up quite quickly on social media, or you will be able to find, as we demonstrated on the programme yesterday, you can normally find an objective fact checker on a big claim quite easily. And it's odd, perhaps, for someone of your age to watch very, very senior politicians make claims that are provably false.
Exactly. And I think that it wasn't as, that would have been nice. But the thing that, it was just the whole tone of the event. And
okay. What would you have preferred? What would you have preferred?
See, I don't actually think that there would have been a good setup for having both leaders talk to each other, because if we have a look at PMQs, another reason why a lot of young people hate politics is because the clips from there don't really make any sense to people because of the parliamentary language, and people talk over each other. So I saw quite a lot of people on Twitter saying I would have preferred a long half-hour interview to get in depth with one, followed by a long half-hour interview with the other, and then potentially at the end give people, 5 minutes to remark on what the other said. I just think that if we want to actually engage young people in politics, having people shouting over each other, I'm really involved with politics. I find it fascinating. Right. I know that I'm in the bubble. I know that I'm in the 1% of young people. And even I wanted to turn it off after 10 minutes because I just felt it was awkward and cringy, and there was going to be nothing there that I wasn't going to see on Twitter the next day because it was all for the 30-second clips.
Is that? Oh, that's interesting. Is that the fault of the format, do you think?
I don't have enough experience to really be able to tell. Having a little bit longer for answering extremely complex questions would have been nice, but then would you have lost engageability? But the fact that there were some questions that are so broad, like the last question from the young man saying, basically, what are you going to do for young people? You have 45 seconds, go.
Yeah, that's just silly. And that's just silly. It's actually quite patronising. It's quite patronising as well, isn't it?
Patronising as such for the format, but because there were questions for the whole event that were relevant to young people, but it was just the fact that they weren't giving. I think it was patronising for them, frankly, as much as anything. Yes. Because
go on, give me this 45 seconds. It's just, you're right. It's patronising to them as well. That's very generous of you.
Especially if there was there were some heartbreaking stories there. From the woman talking about the NHS and
right. What did she say?
She had lost some family members, and she had just finished off cancer treatment herself, and the fact that when you have a question like that, you need to spend the first 10 seconds actually being empathetic and saying, I'm really sorry for your loss, it's really hard, and all of a sudden that's a quarter of your time that you have to say, the question basically was, the NHS is broken, do you agree, and what are you going to do about it? People have written PhD essays, PhD theses on it, let alone 45 seconds.
That's a really good point. Was there anything you liked?
I really liked that when there was actually some difference between them and they weren't talking over each other. And the main thing for me was the ECHR question.
Right.
Because the European Court of Human Rights, Rishi Sunak again called it a foreign court. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because I'll get angry.
But this is where he's, in my view, this trying to be a Farage tribute act. Now that Farage is back in the game, it couldn't be going worse for him, really.
Exactly. But Keir Starmer turned round and said, "No, we are not leaving it. These are the reasons why," and it was set up after World War II.
Yes,
and that is fundamental.
Did he mention Churchill?
I can't remember if he mentioned Churchill directly.
He should have mentioned. It's always good to mention Churchill.
He mentioned it was a Tory government that brought us into it. He definitely did that.
Yes, of course.
So, and I think a lot. I think the target audience for Sunak was clearly the over 65. He wanted to appease his own audience,
right?
And so that, for me, was the most genuine answer. I think
proper clear blue water between them, and both fairly. I mean, for Sunak, I think it's all about if the European Court of Human Rights prevents him from denying human rights to some people, in this case refugees, then he'll leave it. That's the point, because he's determined to deport people, even if it involves denying them the human rights that are enshrined in that convention. You're really good. Thank you, Anthony. What's Whaley Bridge like? I was in the Peak District at the weekend, but I was further south. I was more down towards Bakewell and Matlock.
I mean, absolutely stunning. The sun's out, and I'm looking at the hills as we speak. So I really can't complain.
No wonder you're so at one with the universe. No wonder you're so at peace. It's such a beautiful part of the world. Thank you, mate. Lovely stuff. Fact checkers would be nice, says James in Harrow. On the flip side, they wouldn't allow for epic fails, such as the amount of rope that Rishi Sunak has used to hang himself with this lie. If fact checkers had been involved, it would have been shut down early, and we wouldn't have had this colossal lie running around the world now. Yeah, but you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, James, so you're going to get a lot of coverage of this lie. just as you would if Keir Starmer had been busted this morning for telling a massive lie last night. If you were relying on the Telegraph or the Mail or the Murdoch media, or certainly the Sun, maybe not so much the Time, then you might not even know about it. He did indeed mention Churchill by name, which when I was a lad, and a text coming in to tell me that, when I was a lad, reminding people that the European Convention on Human Rights was part of one of the proudest parts of Winston Churchill's legacy for a traditional conservative, big C or small c, or both, that would have been the end of the conversation. You want to do what? You want to rip up one of the proudest parts of Winston Churchill's legacy, but such is the nature of post-Brexit broken Britain that senior Tories now are queuing up to say, yeah, I do want to rip it up. I do, and of course Farage as well, I do want to rip it up. Winston who? They could say. Michael's in Newport Pagnell. Michael, what would you like to say?
James, how's it going, all right?
All good, mate. What's on your mind?
So, if I may, I've got three things I'd like to tell you from last night.
In one.
Right, so what I saw, first of all, I saw two men come out. One straight away just looked like he wanted to be disruptive, argumentative and hostile, which is Rishi Sunak, and Keir Starmer just wanted to kind of look like he wanted to talk, debate, explain, and you could see at times, like you said in PMQs, he was seething, because when he'd done a split screen of the two, that you could see he was seething with the way it was going. It just wasn't good to watch. And I made the wife watch it as well, trying to get her involved in politics, bless her.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Had a fact checker in the studio for some of their election coverage, I guess. It would probably be 2015 then, would it, I think? And I remember thinking, crikey, they're ahead of the curve. And somewhat remarkably, they still are. I mean, how hard would it be to have a proper fact checker in the studio? I mean, visible, in vision, sitting there, like a bit like what Richard Osman used to do on Pointless. And now they all take it in turns. Or like Susie Dent in Dictionary Corner. You just have someone there in Fact Checker's Corner. You can have this for nothing, lads. Seriously. You'd have someone there in Fact Checker's Corner, and every 20 minutes or so, the presenter would turn to Fact Checker's Corner, and you'd have a 2 or 3 minute slot scheduled. But obviously they'd have been in communication with the gallery, so if nothing had come up that needed to be challenged or explained, they'd just say, no, everything's fine so far. Fact checker over and out. But obviously, if something had come up, well, yes, actually, we do have some concerns over the claims that Mr. Sunak made regarding That I think would enhance the whole experience for everybody. And so why haven't they done it? I do not know. Jay says, please remember to tell us who your co-hosts were on Central Weekend Live. Whereas Mike says, please stop telling us things and then forgetting to give us the information that you've promised to give us. You both have a point. I think this was worth the wait, actually. So the three people that presented Central Weekend Live about 20 years ago, or just under, no more, because it was before I did this, were me, James O'Brien, and then two women. I don't know what happened to them since. I thought they had great careers ahead of them, but they've disappeared without trace. One was called Claudia Winkleman, and the other was called Victoria Derbyshire. No idea where. If you know what they're doing now, just get to give them my best, won't you? And my commiserations at how things have turned out. It's tough old business, show business. 10:52 is the time. Is Natasha ready? Are we going to Natasha? I think we are. Natasha Clark was in Manchester last night for this debate, so has a ringside seat, so to speak. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know how much of this programme you've caught today, Natasha, but the sense that this £2,000 thing has got a life, it's taken on a life of its own, didn't come across last night in the studio at all, did it?
Morning, James. Yeah, no, of course it didn't. And obviously one of the criticisms that you've heard from callers all morning is that you just can't get into some of these issues in the 45 seconds. And it's really hard to have a fact checker, like so many callers have been telling you all morning. We really should try, I think, in these debates to try and have someone in the room that's going to be able to fact check what the politicians are saying as they say it. But I appreciate it is a really hard format to do. And like you say, this issue about the tax claim, I think has really stuck. Sunak repeatedly saying that as sure as night follows day, Labour are going to increase your taxes. And last night he repeatedly claimed, based on this Tory costing dossier, that Labour were going to raise taxes for everyone.
£2,000 in higher taxes for every working family in our country after all the hard work and sacrifice we've been through. That's not the right course of action. I don't know why you want to put up people's taxes.
But I think, to be fair, James, on Keir Starmer's side...
Well, hang on, before that, but we now know that not only is the current tax burden the highest it's been in 70 years, but also, according to James Bowler, the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, who Sunak was claiming had undertaken these costs, we now know that it's a complete lie.
Yeah, and why didn't Keir Starmer call it out, though?
I'm
surprised, and I don't really know why they waited until today. Obviously, you've got into that theory today that maybe Labour were waiting for a gotcha moment to do this. Maybe they just thought, oh no, we need to dig around. What have we got? Have we got this letter? And they found it down the back.
Well, the more I think about it, the more... If he'd done it in the studio, it might have got lost. Because it was such an ill-tempered business. It was such a, all of the complaints coming into me this morning have been about the talking over and the kind of inability to get into the weeds. So Starmer comes out, I suppose if he'd pulled an actual letter out, that would have been theatre, wouldn't it? That would have been a moment. If he'd had the physical, I have in my hand a letter from James Bowler, Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, that would probably have landed harder than waiting for this morning to come along.
I think so, and that's why I don't quite buy the argument that Labour waited and sat on this. I genuinely think somebody this morning has gone, and I think they've realised what the reaction has been to this claim, and I think they've realised that even if you take the costings aside, this attack on tax has landed. And look, I think that viewers, listeners, readers are going to be very, very confused about all these numbers flying around.
It's the 350 million quid on the side of a bus Mark II, arguably.
It is, but equally, Jonathan Ashworth in the spin room last night handing out a dossier to all of us journalists that, pages and pages of information saying the Tories have got 70 billion of unfunded tax cuts and promises that they've got, including one claim in there that they're saying they're going to abolish inheritance tax. That's not something the Conservatives have done. I genuinely think that both sides are being really, really tricky with the figures that they're putting out. And I think they're trying to confuse everybody by putting all these figures out. And I just think that it's really, really difficult if you're a viewer trying to see through all of this spin. And Labour, it's fair to say as well, they use these official Treasury documents and their costings as well in their own figures. So are they now saying that they're wrong as well? And you're getting into this really messy argument. I think what we can take away from this debate, though, James, is that this tax argument for the Conservatives is going to land. I think we're going to hear a lot more from it. Okay. Yeah, I think in terms of we've heard from callers today saying, I'm worried now, more worried about tax, even if you take that 2,000 figure off. And I think they probably will.
I haven't heard any. I've got this from Mark, who says, can you help me understand this, please? It seems that it will cost me £2,000 if I want to get rid of the Tory government. Where do I send the cheque?
Yeah, and you're totally right. And look, if you look at who won the debate, which again is a different issue to how you're going to vote in the next election, let's just put that important clarification there. YouGov Sunak just won it, 51-49. Savanta said Starmer won on every single metric. JL Partners this morning asked who performed best. Starmer way ahead, 53%, Sunak 33%. Is this actually going to change people's minds?
Nope.
Is this going to change the vote, how people are actually going to vote? You might think that Rishi Sunak did quite well in the debate. You might think he actually, put up quite a good fight. But are you going to vote for him at the next election? I think, according to all the polls, they're going to say no.
Do we have any more clips?
I did have another clip. Would you like to hear a little bit more about... So this was very... I just thought we moved on from the tax...
No, okay, then don't worry. I've enjoyed the conversation more than I would have enjoyed the clips, which is yet another condemnation of the context last night. Natasha, thank you. Safe journey home. Or we may catch up with you again a little later in the programme. Lionel Barber, one of my favourite journalists, former editor of the Financial Times, of course, now hosts a rather splendid podcast called Media Confidential with Alan Rusbridger. He's tweeted in the last 10 minutes, the big lie used so cynically and effectively in the Brexit campaign is making a comeback in the 2024 election. News organisations have a duty to call it out and to reference the Treasury letter refuting Sunak's claims that it has civil service imprimatur. So, I mean, it is a lie. It's not just Labour accusing the Tories of lying. It is a lie. But under Natasha's reading, it's a lie that may land well with potential voters. I'm not so sure. We're allowed to disagree with each other, but she watched the thing and I didn't. In fact, quite a lot of people who did watch it are insisting that Starmer did attempt to rubbish Sunak's claims, but the point you're missing with respect is that he didn't reference the letter. The letter is the it's the kind of golden shot, it's the smoking gun even. It's the thing that he could have pulled it out, and I think maybe Philo's brilliant analysis earlier in the programme notwithstanding, I think it would have been the defining moment of the entire debate. But hey-ho, what do I know? It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Later in the programme, I'm wondering whether Joe Biden's latest intervention on the Israel-Gaza conflict has removed the final fig leaf of plausibility from any attempts to defend or support Israel's continuing carnage in that corner of the world.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm feeling a bit gaslit, writes Rose. No one seems to have mentioned that Starmer did reference the letter and suggested Sunak might not have seen it. Sunak looked really uncomfortable. I'm beginning to think that me not having watched the debate was not actually the stroke of broadcasting genius that I claimed at 10 o'clock this morning, because I've got no idea now what's going on, except that Sunak and latterly Claire Coutinho have clearly lied. Clearly lied. And clearly in fact, I'll read you the whole letter because someone has to. Thank you for your letter dated 24th of May 2024 regarding the presentation of opposition policy costings. So this is to the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, who'd obviously queried some of what his opposite numbers were doing. As you will be aware, when costing the policies of opposition parties, Her Majesty's Treasury and the wider civil service follow established guidance set out in the Directory of Civil Service Guidance. As per this guidance, the costings produced by His Majesty's Treasury and the wider civil service are published on the gov.uk website. As you will expect, civil servants were not involved in the production or presentation of the Conservative Party's document, Labour's Tax Rises, or in the calculation of the total figure used. In your letter, you highlight that the £38 billion figure used in the Conservative Party's publication includes costs beyond those provided by the civil service and published online by His Majesty's Treasury. I agree that any costings derived from any other sources or produced by other organisations should not be presented as having been produced by the civil service. I have reminded ministers and advisers that this should be the case. So that was on the 3rd of June 2024. Subsequently, Rishi Sunak and Claire Coutinho have both claimed that this figure, which the 38 billion breaks down to the 2,000 per household, that they have both claimed that this is costed by independent civil servants, and that is a blatant lie. That is a barefaced lie. That's not an opinion, that's just counting. And in the last few minutes, Rishi Sunak has released a tweet. I don't quite understand it. I think it's a sort of, can I watch it now? Can I just watch it on my phone? Or would that be bad radio? It's like a piggy bank floating through the clouds. Why not? It'd be quite funny to watch it. Like, no? Honestly, but this is the crazy zany stuff people tune in for. This is you don't get this from the grown-ups. All right, I won't watch it then. Life is spoil sport. But it proves that they're doubling down despite. And this is really interesting. This is really interesting because the question I'm going to ask you, and I've got more calls coming in on what we thought happened last night, by the way, because we haven't got through that many yet. And it's going to be the only debate, I think, between the two leaders. So we may as well fill our boots while we can. The question that I've got forming in the back of my mind is quite a strange one, actually. It's an obvious one. I'm not going to win any prizes for originality. But I probably know more than is healthy about the ways in which the British public has been detached from reality. I probably know more because of the book that I wrote, How They Broke Britain. It is literally looking at a 30, 40-year period in which we could become a country where everything from the despicable Hillsborough front page on Rupert Murdoch and Kelvin Mackenzie's Sun newspaper, right through to the £350 million lie on the side of the bus, or becoming the first population in human history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself, or indeed have a man as Prime Minister whose relationship with the truth was not so much strained as completely non-existent. So all these different stages in the diminishment of a nation. And it's far from over, of course, as the return to the political fray widely reported this week proves. The process is not over. We are still in the hole. We are still broken, as it were. So I know a little bit more than is healthy about that, but I don't know the answer to this question. So Sunak and the Tories are now lying about Labour's tax plans. It has been proved beyond any reasonable doubt that they are lying. The question that I've got for you is whether or not you think it will work. Because it's worked in the past. Boris Johnson's lies worked. Boris Johnson's lies secured an 80-seat majority in 2019. Nigel Farage's lies and Boris Johnson's lies secured a Brexit referendum victory in 2016. Dominic Cummings' lies, he gets a chapter in the book, that secured. They helped secure a victory in 2016. I don't know whether or not this lie will work in the way that previous lies by previous politicians have worked to such a detrimental and such a terrible effect in this country. Does it work as a video if we play it on the radio? Is it going to? All right. I was only asking. Let's just play it then. £2,000. Is that it? And it's just this big floating piggy bank. This is Armando Iannucci. This isn't real. Is it? So it's a massive piggy bank floating over a town with a kind of almost what would that be, Keith? Would that be drum and bass or jungle? That kind of... No, neither really. Would you say it was ambient? Even that. I thought that was quite industrial. Either way, what an absolute pile of cabbage. I don't. But we can't accept that to answer the question. All right. You pay attention more than average because you listen to this program, this radio station, to current affairs. You have watched. Even some of us fell for the lies, didn't we? But you have watched the process by which the lies have been revealed. You can see a country in which some of the biggest liars are not facing any consequences, particularly. You heard on yesterday's program, if you were listening, what it does to the general public. The chap who rang in convinced that... you can laugh when you hear this if you didn't hear the call, but I don't think you'd have laughed if you heard the call. Convinced to the point where he'd ring a national radio station. Convinced that Sadiq Khan is introducing Sharia law to London. My little worry yesterday that Muslims are going to become the new Brussels in some corners of political debate in the next 4 weeks has not gone away. By the way, I do think that's a very real danger. But the question, at some point, it has to break, doesn't it? At some point, the oil tanker has to start heading back towards reality. And politicians who lie to us have to start failing. We've had, and I don't know whether we're there yet. I want to know what you think. Do you think this lie will fail? Part of it has to do with the caliber of liar. Boris Johnson, whatever you think about him, no one could dispute, an absolutely brilliant liar. He spent his whole life lying to his teachers, lying to his parents, lying to his schoolmates, lying to his wives, lying to his mistresses, lying to absolutely everybody, his colleagues, his editors, his employers, his cabinet ministers, the public, Parliament, lying to Parliament. And Boris Johnson was like a kind of Millennium Falcon of liars. Rishi Sunak is obviously profoundly dishonest because he will know, because he's been told that he shouldn't have been claiming these figures were produced by the civil service. But he's not a very good liar, necessarily. So that might be part of it. It might not be a question of whether or not the country is heading back towards the truth. It might just be that you need a really spectacular liar in order to really pull it off, like Trump, for example. So I don't know. But we can ask the specific question this morning of whether or not this lie will land. Sadly, tragically, we live in a country where the political landscape of certainly the last 8 years has been defined almost entirely by lies. We need more, they need us more than we need them. Cost of living will come down. You'll be better off. We'll get Brexit done. There'll be no border in the Irish Sea. I didn't have a party in the House of Commons. My unfunded budget will be brilliant for British business. All of these things. I was looking at what Farage said about Truss's budget, by the way. He said it was the best Tory budget ever, I think, or certainly the best Tory budget of his lifetime. How quickly we forget. So we know that we live in a country where lies work politically on a scale that I find terrifying. Do you think this lie will work? So it's 11:13. Some more post-mortems of yesterday's televised debate, but also now a specific inquiry about whether Rishi Sunak's lies about Labour's spending plans will land. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Nicola is in Sutton. Sorry to keep you, Nicola. I needed to slightly redirect the traffic. What would you like to say?
Oh, I appreciate your apology because I think I'm more nervous now after all the way.
Well, that's even worse. I've given you time to sort of contemplate the look down from the diving board, but don't worry, I shall catch you.
So I'm not from any kind of school that did any debating or whatever, and I think I went into last night really naive because I thought they were going to actually answer some questions.
Yes.
So I was incredibly disappointed. I actually spoke to my 19-year-old who's just at uni, and he's determined not to vote, and I told him what I thought was a debate, and he was like, well, yeah, there you go, that's why I'm not voting, and it's so disappointing. I'm a complete Keir Starmer backer. I've been so disappointed how people have said, oh, he hasn't got the personality, I'm like, no, he's a serious guy, but I was disappointed with his performance last night.
Tell me why.
Well, partly because he also did, just like Rishi Sunak, he just didn't answer any questions. I know one of your callers earlier said how important it is for the politicians to empathise with the questioners, but actually I think if I was there asking a question, I would want it answered. I'm not there just to get some sympathy from a politician. True. So I don't want them to spend 10, 15 seconds, however long it is. They not only empathised with the person who was answering the question, they then had to feel like they justified their position because their mum did this job and their dad did this job and they went to this school, and it was just pathetic. I was literally so disappointed. I don't think there was one question that was answered properly. And
I think the earlier caller said the European Convention on Human Rights question was answered fairly comprehensively, but
eventually, the £2,000 issue, Rishi brought that up in answer to not in answer, but to put down Labour in pretty much every single question that was answered. I don't think it was until part 2 of the debate that Keir Starmer actually kind of disputed it to any respect. And I actually worried afterwards that people will come away with that, I'm going to be paying 2,000 more tax if I.
So you think the lie will work? You think the lie might work?
I think it will, because I don't think he effectively disputed it. And if people aren't listening to, your programme today, where
well, it's not just me. I mean, it's not just me. It is being fairly widely reported, but probably not as widely reported as the debate was broadcast.
Yeah, no, totally. And hopefully people will listen. But people often hear what they want to hear, don't they? And that's...
Oh, yes.
That was what I was worried about, that Keir should have nipped it in the bud as soon as Rishi Sunak said it. Because you shouldn't need a fact checker. He's going to be Prime Minister. He should know if that is a lie, he should be able to dispute it.
And you saw what you saw. Because I've got other people telling me that he tried and that he wasn't really allowed to. So how much of your criticism is of Keir Starmer and how much is of the format?
I think the format could have been fine if they had just buckled down and answered the question.
They should have had one microphone, Nicola.
Sorry?
They should have had one microphone, so they'd have to take turns with it.
Yeah, maybe that will turn off the one that's not meant to be talking.
Yeah, like in the Hunger Games, they have to fight.
Yeah.
So it starts off with the microphone in the middle of the studio, and then Sunak comes in from one side of the studio, and Starmer comes in from the other. They sprint towards the microphone. One of them does a somersault, one of them does a forward roll, grab the microphone, then the other person can't be heard until the time is up, and you have to hand it over to the other person.
Yeah, but, Keir Starmer, for me, that was just a brilliant platform. He could have done so much with it, and I just think he just disappointed me as a potential Labour voter.
So it's a C minus.
I think it was Miles, as someone mentioned him earlier, the young person in the audience who asked the question about how are you going to put young people central. And Keir Starmer, I don't even know what he said, but he didn't mention that Labour wants to decrease the voting age to 16. He didn't talk about youth services. He didn't talk about, bringing up education and employment opportunities to increase opportunities across the country. Why? You've got 45 seconds. Say what's important.
Should have had that prepared as well, because you don't know what the questions are in advance, but you could have a pretty good guess that was going to come up. Do you know what you've just done?
What have I just done?
You've just gone in the space of about 4 minutes from claiming that you were very, very nervous to sounding as if
ranting and raving.
No, to sounding as if you think you could have done a better job last night than Keir Starmer.
Oh, well, that's disappointing in itself, isn't it? What I really wanted to say was, because I know you're not a Question Time fan, but me and my husband do quite religiously watch it, and Daisy Cooper was on it. I think she's the deputy
leader of the Lib Dems, yes.
So she was on, and I think at the same one there was a Labour shadow education. I can't remember her name. But at that point I was like, oh, great, shadow education minister. And already 5 minutes in, I was like, oh, my God, why doesn't she answer a question? Daisy Cooper was concise. Every question, she just answered it. Right. And people might not agree with what she said, but she just came across like, I know my stuff. This is what we're going to do. And
you want clarity.
It was really powerful.
Yeah. Well, I hope she's listening, or someone will pass that on, because it sounds as if it may have nudged the needle of your vote, but you'll be aware that I can't go into too much detail on that kind of question, given that we are in a period of purdah, and I suffer from a condition known as political purdah paranoia. I think I was the first diagnosed case of political purdah paranoia in the British media. Thank you, Nicola. It's 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
So the clearer it becomes that Rishi Sunak lied last night and Claire Coutinho lied this morning and the entire Tory party is dedicated to a lie, the more easy it becomes to understand today's front pages. Daily Express, kapow, feisty Rishi. And these, remember, are the newspapers and the politicians that brought you Brexit. Also built on an enormous lie, well, millions of enormous lies, but most obviously the 350 million quid on the side of the bus. Kapow, feisty Rishi floors Starmer over £2,000 tax rise. Fiery Rishi comes out swinging and lands big blows. Labour accused on tax as Sunak comes out fighting. Starmer on the ropes over tax. Express, Mail, Times, Telegraph, in that order. So you can understand why. I mean, lies have delivered victories to these exact people and these exact newspapers since 2016. Are we going to? I mean, is it going to happen again? Are we going to see more lies, or do you think that the public have had enough now, or enough of the public have had enough, have developed the ability to spot a lie, to see a lie? I don't know. Jamie's in Aberdeen. Jamie, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. Thanks for having me on.
How many times was Scotland mentioned last night?
I don't think once, actually. Maybe
no, it wasn't.
Touch on GD Energy, but
I don't think I'm getting a few messages telling me it wasn't, so that's why I asked the question.
So yeah, in that case, it wasn't. But I'll lead off kind of
outrageous.
Going on to that, I was going to save this a bit till later, but I was incredibly frustrated by the format because, particularly towards the end, I get there's got to be a bit of lightheartedness to it, but they started asking about the football. And obviously England playing in the Euros. I'm not going to lie, but I don't think people in Scotland and Wales care about what two politicians think about English football when there's a lot more at stake.
True, now, but I mean, that's sour grapes though, isn't it, pal?
Yeah, I know. It's just one of those things, though. It did kind of frustrate me, though, given that they were, they only had 45 seconds for each of these questions, if that in some cases.
That seemed like a waste of opportunity. So you can ask about the football and not ask anything that's specific to Scotland.
Yeah, well, it's not even so much about the, obviously I've got to feel like Scotland's important because I live here. I've lived here my whole life.
Yes,
probably will live here for the rest of my life. But, I think some of the proposals, particularly around the GB energy stuff, that's got great potential for Scotland. Aberdeen were known for energy, oil and gas, all that sorts of things. I think it's great to have those sort of policies to push and help us with a transition and potentially create more jobs, in the future, because there is going to be that transition and we do need to make effort on that, both in terms of hopefully saving on energy bills as well as climate-based things.
Yes.
But that, going back to that football point, that 45 seconds, however long they had for that question, I would have much rather that been on, question about the NHS, question about, cost of living, things like that. Even if it was a case of, okay, well, rather than have 45 seconds, you've got 90 seconds for this one. And I think that kind of goes down to the issue of the format. I was saying to one of your producers, I feel like this was a perfect debate for TikTok, not TV.
Oh, okay. But and you mean that as a bad thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because not everyone does. I mean, so, the TikTok is an increasingly important platform for politics. I hadn't really appreciated it myself until quite recently. But you're right. That's not what you want from an hour-long program on live national television.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of TikTok personally. I think it's just more time on social media. Just kind of rots my brain a bit. But I think it's a kind of trend towards short-form content where it's easy to just grab you in, and I think it was very much let's just get in as many sound bites as we can.
And also don't. I mean, from some of the clips that we've played about Sunak, it would appear he was trying not to let Starmer have enough of the floor to actually get a clip put together. Thank you, Jamie. Obviously, when I talked about sour grapes, I was referring to Wales. Not being at the Euros as opposed to Scotland, who are. But I mean, I question about England's prospects in the football is that would also involve a bit of sour grapes from Scottish viewers. But I agree with Jamie completely. I'd hate it when people attempt to prove their sort of laddish credentials. Keir Starmer is a full-on football fan, and I think that Rishi Sunak is a genuine Southampton fan as well. Starmer plays a lot. Or certainly used to, but it's a bit like the broadcaster going, "Oh, this is what the public are interested in." When the public, as Jamie's just expressed quite perfectly, the public are not. Talat is in Kingswood in Surrey. Talat, what would you like to say?
Well, I think Richie managed to get his message across that Labour's going to cost you $2,000 more. It might be a lie, it might be this, that, and the other, but at the end of the day,
no, it's not. There's no might be about it. It's a blatant lie, as established by the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury.
Sure, most people, James, do not go into the Permanent Secretary's edict or read letters, etc. Most people are busy doing other
the kind
things,
of people that tune into a political debate are going to be at least vaguely aware of what's being reported in the political,
James, for example,
the political media this morning.
Well, you missed it, for example.
No, I missed the debate, yes, but I've read the letter to you already this morning, so I'm a bad example. The people that watched the debate are likely to be sufficiently engaged to be aware of the letter, aren't they?
That may be so, but the point I'm going to make, because I was trying to make, was that most people would have come away from listening to that thinking Labour may cost us £2,000 per year more, and that I think will have hit home.
Yes, so did Natasha. But that's why I'm interested in. Now they know it's a lie. Will they, as with Brexit or as with Boris Johnson, will they, even though they've been given all the evidence that it's a lie, will they continue to cling to it?
Well, of course they will, because at the end of the day, people are shallow, I'm afraid, when it comes to...
Well, you don't need to be rude. The difference...
No, I'm not being rude.
You are. You just call people shallow. That's rude. But the difference is, I think people really wanted Boris Johnson's lies to be true. Why would anybody want Rishi Sunak's lies to be true?
No, you're missing the point of it.
No, I'm really not. I'm making the point. So the question is this. People really wanted Brexit lies and Boris Johnson's lies to be true, why would anybody want Rishi Sunak's lies about Labour to be true? Anybody neutral, why would they want it to be true? Because in order to cling to a lie after you've been given the evidence that it's a lie, you need to want it to be true. Like our caller from Durham yesterday with the Muslims. He wants it to be true. So why would anybody want it to be true that Labour is going to cost them £2,000?
Because people know deep down that the socialists, i.e. Labour...
Oh, we got there in the end. So exactly, you're just describing what you want to be true rather than what is actually true. So you're saying, I know it's a lie, but I love it because some people will fall for it. You could have said that. You could have said that up front, mate, and saved us all at least 4 minutes. It's coming up to 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:32, and tomorrow, of course, is the anniversary of D-Day, which is why Henry Riley has been dispatched to Normandy to report on proceedings. And Henry joins me now. How are you getting on?
Well, James, good afternoon here from Normandy. Of course, we're an hour ahead here in France. It has been quite the morning, actually. We have spent it at Pegasus Bridge and the Pegasus Museum. This is where veterans have been meeting, British veterans have been meeting American veterans, and there have been some very touching moments. One British veteran who I'm travelling with recognised the US veteran they've met on various trips like this and just greeted him by saying, "So where were we?" And then they've started talking and sharing memories, sharing anecdotes, and it's all been very touching. Of course, as they arrived here at the museum, as is often customary, they were played in by the Pegasus brass band. Now, James, the Battle of the Bridge was the first battle of D-Day. This is what we are remembering today. 181 men took off from Dorset. They captured this bridge with 6 airspeed Horsa gliders. This was the British 6th Airborne Division, acted as a spearhead for the naval operation. And all of the veterans, as they arrived, clapped in by hundreds of French school children, were given a hero's welcome. Now, this particular greeting was for Sergeant Andy Negra. I had a chat with Andy. He landed on Utah Beach and told me of his memories.
I'm very humble and thankful that they recognized us and remembered what we did in World War II. That's the thing. And their generosity and their applause means a lot to all of us that are here.
He also told me one anecdote of a surreal moment that happened on D-Day.
And finally, when the Germans were 20 miles in, came in and landed at Utah Beach. And the thing I remember there more than anything, when I landed and got off of the landing boat, a friend that lived near me, where I lived back in western Pennsylvania, was down on the ground yelling at my name, and I was yelling at his name. Wow. It was wow is right. Out of all of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers there's this guy from my hometown.
And James, I was obviously interested to just speak to him and hear his memories, but he was insistent. He wanted to hear about England. He has very fond memories of the country, which he told me.
I still can remember Great Risington. I remember that place. And the reason I remember that place, they had a miniature model of the town that you could walk through, a replica of the town itself. I can remember that very well. And then I had a girl, too, from Scotland that I remember. I was dating her at the time.
And James, the service finished quite some time ago, but virtually no one's moved. They are all just sitting, chatting. The British veterans are hugging the American veterans. It's been quite something this morning. And we had the last post played by 3 buglers on top of Pegasus Bridge. A wreath was laid, and this is just one in a sort of jam-packed day of events.
The anniversary proper, of course, unfolds tomorrow when there'll be a lot more going on. Henry, I'm sure you won't mind me pointing out to listeners that you're a young man. What, given your age, and I mean you're a young man, but you are older now than the men that you're accompanying and talking to would have been when they landed on D-Day, given that they almost all be 100 or older now. As a young man, what have you been most struck by?
There is so much. I mean, just the optimism of these veterans who are, I mean, they love sharing their stories. They never get tired of sharing their stories. I mean, as you can imagine, James, I'm not the only member of the media here, and
that
they
would be quite a scoop,
of course, which would be, I know, it'd be something, wouldn't it? But they are just so generous with their time, and they're willing to share stories. They're willing to share very personal, cheeky anecdotes, as you heard. Then they are just extremely generous, and so yeah, I mean, There's a lot of it. I mean, the sort of military precision of all of the events has been extremely impressive, but just the way the veterans here, I mean, I'm here to learn about D-Day and to hear more of their stories, but they're so fascinated in me, and I keep saying, no, I want to talk about you, but they are just extremely interested in everything.
I was struck by what you said about the school children. I've been to the beaches and the broader area as well, and D-Day remains, I think, possibly for British visitors, it remains surprisingly close to the surface of modernity, doesn't it? Even at times when they're not commemorating anniversaries or remembering the operation. Children, presumably then, are taught about the role that the Allied troops played on that day.
Yeah, and these French school children in English were saying to the US veterans, thank you for your service, which I could tell really touched a lot of the veterans who were here. I mean, there have been various moments, James. I'm trying to keep it together.
Of course.
It really has been something. And the way the school children are talking to them, there's a big Pegasus cafe, which I didn't actually realise. It's this huge cafe just on the foot of Pegasus Bridge. And they actually had to sort of close it to visitors because there was about 300 people outside. But it's just school children talking to 99-year-old, 100-year-old veterans and not interrupting, just sitting, listening and being really engaged and listening to every single syllable.
That's a beautiful report. Thank you. Henry Riley there, live from Normandy, live from Pegasus Bridge, indeed, such a crucial part of that operation. And the 80th anniversary of the actual D-Day landings will take place tomorrow on the 6th of June. Henry will still be there. It is 11:39. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You're not the only one struggling to hold it together. A text here saying, a wonderful interview there from Henry. Genuine tears in my eyes listening to it. A few people had tears in their eyes watching that debate last night, although they were, I fear, tears of a very different order. What did you make of it? But I'm intrigued also by the success or otherwise of this enormous lie that Rishi Sunak has been revealed to have told. Do you think the British public is still sufficiently gaslit, I suppose, to let it happen again? Paul's in Tower Hamlets. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. Yes, I mean, I did watch this debate last night, and I watch all politics with, or at least listen to it with a massive pinch of salt. Now, not to say that I am a Labour voter. That was certainly the way I was looking. But after last night, I'm watching Keir sort of squirm. Given that this letter's come out this morning, I don't know if I'm convinced enough after the lack thereof showmanship, I suppose, from Keir, to put my support in him. Rishi's been, and the Conservatives have been very questionable over the last 14 years. But there was some definitive plan that Rishi was able to spit out. Whether it comes to light or not, I'm not sure.
What, I didn't see it. What was that?
Well, for example, I mean, just picking up off of what one of your researchers asked me about a plan. I mean,
what was your favourite bit of it?
I suppose my favourite bit in both parties, I suppose.
No, because you said Sunak had a clear plan, and I didn't see it. So, what was the favourite bit of the clear plan?
Right, sorry, that's why you're saying my favourite bit. Sorry, no. There was mention of the Rwanda plan, right? Now everyone's got their back up about this, or in some form or another.
He's had that plan since he became Prime Minister, and nothing's happened.
Well, nothing's happened, but it is going to happen. At least that, with the conversation that was held last night.
It's probably not.
Well,
otherwise they'd have called the election later. and had it after it had happened. So, I mean, you watched the debate last night. You thought that Rishi Sunak had a clear plan, and your favourite bit of it was the Rwanda plan that has already failed.
Well, I say the Rwanda plan, it was just what I grabbed onto. I mean,
pick something else then, because, I mean, to be fair, it's important that we give you plenty of time, because most people have been quite critical of Rishi Sunak, and you heard him offer up a clear plan. And Starmer apparently didn't. So I'm just putting some flesh on the bones of what that plan is. So it can't be Rwanda, can it? Because that plan has already failed.
Well, I'm of the opinion. I think that he will pull the Rwanda plan into touch. I think ultimately in the next couple of weeks/months.
He's already said he won't do it in the next couple of weeks. He's already said it won't happen before the election.
I mean, look, if we're going to picture over the space of a couple of weeks or a couple of months...
I'm just repeating your words back to you. So, I mean, let's presume that Rwanda... Let's presume Rwanda... Okay.
So let's circle back to last night's debate, where Rishi...
I didn't think we'd left it, had we?
A multitude of different concerns.
Yes.
Gave answers.
For example...
You're going to have to forgive me, because I can't pull an example.
Can I just, for the benefit of people listening, we didn't ring you, did we, Paul? You did ring into this programme to tell us about all of the plans and the clear answers that Rishi Sunak gave. And I, perhaps very rudely...
I didn't, actually. To be fair, I actually didn't. That wasn't the intent of my call. The intent of my call was really to say that I'm maybe possibly swayed to go and vote potentially Conservative after the lack thereof.
And then you started giving me your reasons, and I asked you for some examples, and you've apologised for not having any. I think a lot of people listening are going to struggle.
That is an apology for being on the spot.
Well, you're not on the spot, mate. It's a phone-in show. You said, I really liked these things, and I said, what things?
Come on, let's be fair. I'm sat here with nothing in front of me, and I wanted to talk to you earlier, and I've been here for a while. Now, I appreciate what you're saying. Ultimately, I'm not giving you much of an answer right there and then, but from the debate, now let's go back to last night, and this letter, it is concerning hearing that about the Conservatives. Absolutely. It all appears to be nonsense. But
never gets old. Tony's in Greenock. Tony, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking the call. My concern is around this whole £2,000 lie that's been revealed. The fact that we're relying really heavily on the media to highlight this.
'Twas ever thus, Anthony.
Yes, that's my Sunday name. Please don't use that. Claire Coutinho this morning basically repeating the lie.
They know, and they're still doing it. That's the point, isn't it?
It emboldens them to then say, well, what can we get away with next? What big bad Labour policy can we threaten them with next that says, if you get Labour, you get this? Is it children back to the poor houses?
Take your car away or put your children up chimneys or something like that. What's it going to be?
It needs to be debunked, and basically, I don't know what mechanism should be used, but if it is a downright lie, which it's been proved to be, then people need to know that. Because I said to your researcher there on the phone, people read the headlines, they don't read the detail, and the headline is £2,000 out of your pocket. For example.
But the headline is also, and this is your original point, isn't it? It depends how far these headlines go. That line that's always attributed to Goebbels about a lie being halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. Because the headline is also, Rishi Sunak is a liar. It says, essentially says Permanent Secretary to the Treasury. That's a pretty big headline. But what you're reminding us of is the number of outlets that will report that straight may be somewhat dwarfed by the number of outlets that will report it bent.
Yeah. It may be page 6, paragraph, at the bottom of a page. By the way, we were wrong about that. Here's the truth. But the headline will still be, they're after your money. They're going to take your money.
Yeah, maybe. We shall see. And that question of whether people fall for it perhaps needs a little bit of finessing, because it's not a question of gullibility. It's a question of how exposed they are to the sort of broader issues. Lewis Goodall, as you'd expect, written a splendid brief thread on this very specific issue, which I shall take the opportunity to share with you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 12, as promised. Here is Lewis Goodall, of course, presenter of the News Agents, and with you on Sundays with the, it took them ages to come up with this title, Sunday with Lewis Goodall on LBC. And he had a proper look at this letter from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, making it absolutely crystal clear that the attack on the Labour Party should not be presented as having been produced by the civil service. And I'll read all of this to you because I always find Lewis's insights incredibly helpful and interesting. Already a lot of talk along the lines of, quotes, Conservatives will be pleased because all we're talking about is the £2,000 figure. And this mirrors the £350 million NHS bus nonsense. I get this as an analysis of the political strategy, but it shouldn't be any part of how it's covered. The only thing which should be discussed is the substance of what Sunak said, which is clearly wrong and deeply misleading. We can't keep marvelling at the political genius of either misleading or lying to the public about something. It incentivises them to do it again. The only question that matters this morning is whether the Prime Minister knowingly misled the public, i.e. he lied. By the way, all of this still makes Starmer's failure to categorically slap the claim down as Sunak made it all the more puzzling. Yes, he was struggling to get a word in, but it was the key exchange of the debate and it needed to be said unequivocally and early. Let's think about this as a piece of analysis. It's basically saying a politician is putting forward something which the public might think is the truth, but which is not. So we shouldn't be telling them it's terribly clever. I don't think we've fallen into that trap on this programme, but I suspect a lot of other coverage is in danger of doing so. And if we have, then it's time to undertake a swift reverse ferret. 11:52 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I have been haunted by thoughts of Asian hornets. I don't know if you were listening to yesterday's programme, but I had heard a report about the fact that they have been shown to have survived the UK winter for the first time, and that this could pose a grave threat to the honeybee populations of these islands. Genuinely haunted by it. So particularly some imagery of Asian hornets waiting outside bees' nests or beehives to sort of pick off the honeybees and devour them. Someone described a beehive as like a supermarket for an Asian hornet. So I thought we'd better get some more detail on this. Happily, Professor Sirian Sumner is a professor of behavioural ecology at UCL and the author of Endless Forms, Why We Should Love Wasps, but not hornets, Sirian.
Well, thanks for having me on. Hornets are wasps. They are just a different genus of wasps. They're close relatives of the picnic-bothering yellow ticket wasps that everyone is so familiar with, and that give wasps an unfairly bad name because there are over 100,000 species of wasps, and it's just a few species, including things like this invasive yellow-legged Asian hornet that give wasps a bad name.
I like it, and I like the sound of your book. But we are here to talk about these unrepresentative wrong-uns then of the genus, and how significant do you think it is that this Asian hornet has now managed to overwinter in the UK?
Well, it's certainly concerning. I mean, just to put this in perspective, that any kind of invasive insect or invasive organism is a concern and a threat to the local ecosystems. And the invasive hornet is just one of the many. So we've had lots of invasive insects before. We still have them, like the harlequin ladybird, for example.
Oh, yes.
Many years ago, and now is more or less displaced our native ladybirds, but they fulfill the same kind of ecological niche. They do the same things in ecosystems that the native species do. And so I'm not going to pretend that I'm not slightly scared.
Yes.
Slightly worried, not scared, I'm not scared of wasps at all, but I am scared on behalf of our native ecosystem. So we can look to the continent, Europe, mainland Europe, to see what kind of things might happen. And what we do know about Velutina, so Vespa velutina, this Asian hornet, is that it's very good at spreading. It spread across France at 100 kilometres a year. Its population's expanded, and now it's all over mainland France. I think there's over 500,000 nests. I think that's the estimate. And they're spilling over into the surrounding country. So it was only a matter of time before it got to us. We are slightly protected from these insects because we're in an island. So it's much easier to get into an island than it is just to spill over a land border. But the reason why these insects are so successful as invasive species is that all you need is a one mated queen to be imported, like hidden in cargo or something, to Britain, and she can produce a whole nest on her own, because she stores the sperm from all the males that she's mated with in her body, and so she just uses all that sperm to fertilize the egg. So you really, in theory, you only need one mated queen to be able to spark a new population.
You're torn, aren't you, Professor, between your enormous enthusiasm for the genus and the pragmatic impact of this particular hornet on the bee population in particular, but the ecosystem in general, because I sense that part of you is enormously admiring of the evolutionary destination that this particular hornet has arrived at.
I mean, absolutely. So it's important to remember that wasps are nature's pest controllers and pollinators. So just in the same way that we love bees because they pollinate, we should be loving wasps because
these eat pollinators as well, don't they? I read somewhere that they can eat 50 bees in a day.
Yeah, so there are, but it's important to remember that there are other pollinators out there, not just honeybees. And actually these hornets also predate heavily on social wasps. So the picnic bothering wasps, for example.
So you could do PR for them by saying, yes, all right, they eat a few bees, but they also eat and they don't sting humans, these hornets.
Well, they will do if you stumble into a nest, same way.
But they're not going to bother you at a picnic in the way that a wasp.
They're not going to come to your picnic, no.
So it's more nuanced than I realised, this invasion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not going to pretend it is a bit worrying, and especially if it gets to the level that it is in mainland France.
Right.
But I have to say that the UK government and the National Bee Unit have done a really good job in keeping this population under wraps until now, and it's the fact that they found using DNA analysis that the queens that they've now discovering this spring are the offspring of the nests from last year.
Yes.
Tells us that they definitely have overwintered here, whereas prior to that, the low levels of discovery were probably due to mostly newly imported queens coming over the channel. So the fact they now have overwintered, it might be partly because we had quite a mild winter as well. What we really need is a harsh frost, which will probably get rid of the overwintering queens, unless they're hiding in a lovely, nicely insulated attic or something.
So I mean, there's a wonderful app. I didn't even know that the National Bee Unit exists. It sounds fantastic. It sounds like something out of the Marvel universe. But the app as well that is available to help people help them track the movements and find the hornets. Just describe finally, if you would, describe the hornet so people know what they're looking for, if you would, Syrian.
Right. So they look very much like our own native European hornet, but they are slightly smaller, but they're still much bigger than a picnic bothering wasp. They're darker than our native hornet, and as the name suggests, the yellow-legged Asian hornet, they do have yellow legs.
Oh.
And so that is the main thing. The tips of their legs are yellow. So those are the main things to look out for. But we really rely on the public reporting any potential sightings via this app, the Asian Hornet Watch app, which everybody should have on their phones.
I downloaded it yesterday.
Brilliant, yeah. And as I said, the National Bee Unit are doing a really good job. And hopefully with the public being vigilant, we can hopefully keep this population at bay.
Fantastic. More power to their elbows. Thank you so much, Professor Syrian Summer, Professor of Behavioural Ecology at UCL and author of Endless Forms, Why We Should Love Wasps. That's a good sell, isn't it? Why we should love wasps. You'd sort of pick that up off the shelf. Why should we love wasps? I bloody hate wasps. Oh, blimey, I didn't know that about wasps. Anyway, I digress slightly. In the next hour, we turn our attention to the latest comments from Joe Biden, the President, of course, of the United States of America, regarding Benjamin Netanyahu's tactics in Gaza. And my question will be whether or not his latest comments make it absolutely impossible for anybody to continue to defend, support or promote what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing without a complete abandonment of basic morality.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 12 and it is always with a heavy heart that I redirect your attention back to the Gaza Strip, where the continuing carnage demands our attention. Not unlike the war in Ukraine, it is not something you can talk about every single day. But there are days when you have to sort of gird yourself to talk about it, because innocents are dying on an unprecedented scale in Gaza. And I'm afraid that we remain essentially, as a country, an ally of the people responsible for the carnage, as indeed do America. We're now in a really weird, the United States of America. We're now in a really weird space where Joe Biden has gone further than any other president. Indeed, he's gone so far that a spokesman for the Israeli government has described him as being outside the diplomatic norms of every right-thinking country, despite the fact that Biden probably remains more sympathetic to Israel than almost any other country on the planet, including, of course, this one. Whether you're looking at comments made by the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, or the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. So, I mean, the sense of Israel now being completely detached from the rest of the world and completely detached from observable reality has become almost irresistible, because where Biden has gone latterly is in many ways extraordinary. Well, again, it's extraordinary, but at the same time, utterly unsurprising, because it's so obviously true. This has been a really frustrating thing about covering this objectively, has been the fact that Joe Biden will be saying things, or Chuck Schumer will be saying things that speak to the international consensus that Israel has embarked upon an absolutely heinous campaign in Gaza. And they are edging ever closer to that consensus. Whether or not it includes war crimes or genocide becomes more and more debatable, if you like, as the story continues to unfold. But they've been doing it while simultaneously providing more support to Benjamin Netanyahu's regime than any other country on the planet. It's as if they've sort of tried to both support and disapprove of what Netanyahu has been doing. But the new bit, and it's a mark, I think, of how the news cycle works more than anything else, the new bit is significant and somewhat underreported because of the way that the news cycle works. But President Biden has said that Benjamin Netanyahu is now prolonging the war in Gaza for his own purposes. I just want you to stop and think about that for a minute. The reason why the death toll of 36,470 continues to rise has nothing to do with hostages, has nothing to do with Hamas, and it has everything to do with Benjamin Netanyahu's personal interests, his own purposes. This is an interview that he gave to Time magazine a few days before he went public with his own proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. Tensions between the US and Israel are high. As evidenced by those ludicrous comments from the spokesman for the Israeli government, who describes Biden as being outside, or Biden's comments as being outside the diplomatic norms of every right-thinking country. I'd be amazed if there is a right-thinking country on the planet that doesn't agree entirely with Joe Biden's analysis in this case. And as the Telegraph reports this morning, it will be seen as another sign. The Times reports this morning that Biden is running out of patience with Netanyahu and with diplomatic strategies to end the war. So, how do you want to do this one today? I don't think anybody can really disagree with Biden's analysis. I don't know where the line was, and I sometimes think that it was a crass question to ask, but I still don't think there was a better one of how much will be too much. So in the immediate aftermath of the October the 7th attack on Israel, the question was about what would a proportionate response be and what would be a disproportionate response. It became clear incredibly quickly that Netanyahu's response was going to be incredibly disproportionate if you see a Palestinian life as being equal to an Israeli life. If you don't see a Palestinian life as being equal to an Israeli life, then you probably think the response hasn't even become disproportionate yet. But for everybody else, it clearly is. And then as the death toll grew, the question of when the number would become too high, when it would become too much, went through a curious journey, didn't it, of being a sort of brilliant question, or almost a gotcha question. How much is too much? Because you can't really be in favour of every single person in Gaza being killed or murdered in pursuit of potential or possible terrorists. And yet it became clear as those conversations unfolded that some people were in favour of that, even if they weren't immediately prepared to say it out loud. Some members, of course, of Netanyahu's government came pretty close, if not saying it entirely. Most obviously, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, and Bezalel Smotrich, the Finance Minister, who have threatened to leave the government if Netanyahu agrees to a ceasefire, agrees to stop the killing. Even the BBC today has, and I don't mean even the BBC because it has been slow on this or hasn't done good reporting, but I mean even the BBC has managed to get this report out despite the fact that Israel works so hard to keep journalists out of the Gaza Strip. But they have a report today about mass graves and body bags being found at Al-Shifa Hospital after Israel withdrew its forces. During the past 8 months of war, they write, hospitals have come under repeated attack, with Israel claiming that they're used as bases by Hamas. But I saw something amazing recently, which hadn't even entered into the discourse in this country. If the IRA, in their pomp, had been using hospitals in Northern Ireland as bases, or even if the British government claimed that they were, would we all have sat by comfortably while the British government bombed hospitals in Belfast? I don't think we would have done, would we? Oh, no, don't worry, it's used by Hamas as well. Oh, sorry, it's used by the IRA as well. So this sense that there were two sides to the argument, I think, left the building some time ago. I couldn't tell you when, either on a calendar or on that ticking toll of 36,470 dead Palestinians, and how many of them are children. It's usually about a third, isn't it, or thereabouts. Over 10,000 dead children. How many was too many? Because, of course, for people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, there's still not enough dead. There's still not enough dead. But Biden's comments are interesting, because I don't think anybody could really argue with it. And that should be a game-changing moment. If even Israel's doubtiest ally, Joe Biden, the United States of America, is describing the continuing killing of innocent Palestinians as entirely a consequence of Benjamin Netanyahu's own purposes, in other words, clinging on to power, keeping his own administration in place, then what the hell happens next? What actually happens next? So Biden is reaching, and there's an election on the horizon which may be pertinent to the question I'm about to ask you. But Biden is reaching the point where his patience appears to be exhausted, right? I don't know how much, and probably you don't either, how much of Israel's military capabilities are defined by American support, by American military ordinance. But if they have run out entirely of allies, how does it end? I've also seen reports that there's absolutely no prospect whatsoever of Israel agreeing to this. And even if they did agree to it sort of publicly, then there's no way in private that the cabinet could stay together without continuing the killing in Gaza. The main leaders of Hamas, of course, remain at large. They can't agree a ceasefire until all hostages are released. On Friday, he claimed that the threat from Hamas had been degraded to the point where the group could not stage another attack like that of October the 7th. So that, according to Biden, that claim has gone. And I don't know what's left now. So 12 minutes after 12 is the time. If, as seems likely, indeed if it hasn't already happened, if Israel now stands entirely alone on the world stage, and the use of the word genocide has now gathered pace, and it has ended up in places where it hadn't been before. I'll give you a little more detail on that later. Certainly the use of the phrase ethnic cleansing seems to me to be entirely pertinent. But if Israel is now entirely alone on the world stage, how does it end? 0345 6060973. If it's more than a fig leaf, isn't it? If the platform, if the scaffolding of international support, and I was surprised by how lonely the United States of America and the United Kingdom were on the world stage with regard to this issue, how quickly we began to look lonely. But if Israel has acted, if Benjamin Netanyahu has acted in such a way that even his doubtiest historical ally has been disgusted to the point of disassociation, you have now Biden saying the only reason the war is continuing is for Netanyahu's own purposes. Saying asked whether he thought that was happening, he replied, there is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. Is Benjamin Netanyahu prolonging the war for his own political reasons? There is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. So that's it. The game is up. For many of us, it was up a long time ago, but Joe Biden's continuing support for Benjamin Netanyahu made it impossible to see it in completely black and white terms. I think that impossibility has gone. I think it's left the building. And I would like you to tell me what that means. 0345 6060973. What does it mean for the American government to essentially accuse the Israeli Prime Minister of wanting the carnage to continue so that he can keep his job? I say that again. It's important you understand the words. What does it mean when the American president accuses the Israeli Prime Minister of wanting the carnage to continue solely so that he can keep his job? That's question number one. 0345 6060973. Question number two. In the absence of support from anyone else in the world, how does this end? I want you to think about that, and then I want you to ring me. So two really big questions. What does it mean when the President of the United States of America accuses the Prime Minister of Israel of wanting the carnage to continue in Gaza solely and simply so that he can keep his job? And in the absence of support from anywhere else in the world, how does this end? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. The time is 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Co-founder of the Human Rights Watch. He is Jewish and he is a Holocaust survivor. And he has, in the last couple of days, stated that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza, specifically by obstructing the delivery of humanitarian assistance to Gaza since the start of the war there. This accusation, of course, follows the launch of a case in December by South Africa at the International Criminal Court of Justice, attempting to prove that Israel was committing genocide in the war in Gaza. The allegations are, of course, strongly rejected by Israel. It was an extraordinary interview by the journalist Julian Warwicker on the World Service in which this came out. And you would perhaps have expected it, given the provenance of the gentleman himself, of Aryeh Neher himself, and indeed the status of Human Rights Watch. You would probably have expected it to get a little bit more coverage. But I wonder whether Suella Braverman can accuse him of being a hate marcher, or can accuse him of being some sort of provocateur. I'll say it again, a Jewish Holocaust survivor, now accusing, and of course a human rights campaigner for much of his life, now accusing Israel of genocide. So sit that on one side of the scales, and on the other sit Joe Biden's contention that Benjamin Netanyahu is prolonging the war in Gaza for his own political reasons, i.e. it no longer has anything to do with hostages or Hamas, and answer one or both of two questions. The first is, what does this mean? And the second is, given that Israel now stands entirely alone, or that Netanyahu now stands entirely alone, how does this end? Mark's in Staines. Mark, what would you like to say?
Yes, I'd just like to point out that politicians engaging in warfare for political reasons is absolutely nothing new.
No, I don't think anyone thought it was, but that answers neither of the questions that I've just asked, Mark, respectfully.
Well, it's just to point out, really, that at the beginning of the Vietnam War, James McNamara, the American Secretary of State, told Kennedy the war was unwinnable.
Yes.
Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon
with
all
respect,
sent troops to Vietnam.
Yeah, so are we going to have a crack at either of the questions I've just asked or not?
Well, how
does it end? If Israel stands alone, how does it end?
If Israel stands alone, then they would have to end it for self-preservation reasons.
But then Netanyahu would be out and quite possibly in jail or certainly on trial.
Well, this is the problem when you leave a politician with no escape route.
Yeah.
You've got to provide an escape route, and then.
Do you?
Well, that's the only way
some form of immunity from prosecution. Then.
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's a thought. Obviously, not necessarily what you rang in to answer, so I'm not going to pick too many holes in what you've said. But thanks for the reminder of what happened in Vietnam. Aidan's in Colwyn Bay. Aidan, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
I think that Biden has some pressure to say something about the situation, and it's taken this long for him to react in that way. Meanwhile, as you already said, they're supporting Israel financially with weapons and things. I think that there was talk at the time, and I can't have a clue whether it's true, about it possibly of being a false flag in that they let Hamas in the first place to use it as a reason to attack.
It's going to be one of those hours, is it? I mean, there's absolutely no a possibility of it having been a false flag. There are certainly criticisms of Netanyahu for failing to have been properly prepared and indeed, I mean, having a historical comfort with the existence of Hamas because they, like him, remain dedicated to opposing a two-state solution. Perhaps you misspoke, but the idea that it was a false flag is profoundly obnoxious and borderline anti-Semitic, of course. So do tread carefully on this territory. Let me clarify what the questions I'm asking actually are. This is huge. President Biden accusing Benjamin Netanyahu, of continuing the carnage. Those are my words. Prolonging the war would be a more objective description, solely to advance his own political reasons, or if you like, to protect his own political career. What does that mean? 0345 6060 973. And the second question is, and you may need an understanding of Israeli politics to answer this one, or a better understanding of Israeli politics, or even an investment in Israel, a personal, familial, emotional investment in Israel. If Israel stands completely alone on the world stage on this, A, how does it end? And B, what can the world do? If Israel stands alone, writes this texter, then treat them as we treated South Africa during apartheid. Global isolation, economic sanctions, and restrictions placed on citizens. It's a thought, but I can't really see the pendulum swinging that far or that fast in the foreseeable future. Aziz is in Ealing. Aziz, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say it's a question of where it would end. Yes. And the only way I can see it ending right now is really that Gaza becomes so intolerable to human life that they leave and it's ethnically cleansed and Israel takes over Gaza. I think that's where it's going to end.
And that obviously opens the door to the question of would the world stand by, do you think, and let that happen?
I think so. I think for all Biden's talk, he hasn't done anything to shut off aid or arms or bombs that are hitting there. It's just lip service to keep some people, to show people he's on side or just trying to do something. But I think the reality is he's done nothing to stop it.
So, I mean, this is the clash between diplomacy and action, isn't it? But why would he even make these comments then if I mean, so he doesn't want what you described to happen. He must be aware of the possibility of it happening. The longer Benjamin Netanyahu stays in power, the worse everything gets for everybody, but especially for people in Gaza. There are people in his cabinet, as we know, who would settle Gaza and support settlements, illegal settlements in Gaza. Crikey, you've taken me a little bit by surprise on this because of the plausibility of what you described. Why are you so pessimistic about the idea of international intervention or some form of response? Because you don't think that Biden's heart would be in it, or that an American, Trump certainly wouldn't do anything, but you don't think Biden would either?
I don't think Biden would either. I think the only reason why he's actually saying something is because a lot of his supporter base are disgusted with him and he wants to try and win them back.
Yeah.
But if something was going to happen, it would have happened by now, but it's not. And I can't see it happening in the foreseeable future either.
Oh, well, I'm not sure I can now, but hopefully another caller may have a slightly more upbeat analysis. I do see it slightly differently from Aziz in the sense of increments, in the sense of the unusual step of going public with his own proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza being, a precursor to a change of approach. And when you set that alongside, and they didn't happen at the same time, but they happened in the same space, these comments about Netanyahu's self-interest, about his own political reasons, then the idea that eventually Biden, especially if he wins the next election and Netanyahu's still in Gaza, he'll have to do something profound is perhaps, the more I think about what Aziz has said, the more I do think it might be just a little bit naive and optimistic to think that. Would the world really stand by, sit on its hands, while the Israeli government escalated from an already egregious and heinous situation? Derek's in Huntington. Derek, what do you think?
I don't think the world would stand aside and let them do that. I think the world is basically losing a lot of patience. The only real major supporters he's got left in the West, with the exclusion of Germany, are ourselves and the USA. And like we just listened to, Biden's losing patience. I mean, he's been... So what does that look like? How do you mean? What does that look like?
Well, what does the loss of patience look like? I know what the words are.
Well,
Schultz is calling on Netanyahu to sort himself out as well, to sustain. I mean, it's a little bit mealy-mouthed, but to sustainably improve the humanitarian aid and healthcare in Gaza. That was a couple of days ago, and he's expressed concerns about it escalating into a wider regional conflict. I mean, all of these things could happen, but won't happen if Netanyahu's not there anymore.
I'm not sure about the technology now. I know Iron Dome, their aerial defence system, was given to them by the US. I don't know how much they still supply in the way of munitions and maintenance for the system. But as soon as that's turned off, that's Israel, pretty much done.
So that would be it. The end would be Biden saying if you don't cease fire, we don't. I mean, it's a mad situation. If you don't cease fire, we don't give you any guns. But if you do cease fire, we'll give you more. We'll carry on giving you guns. That's like something out of Franz Kafka or Joseph Heller, isn't it?
I don't know about giving them more guns afterwards, but just that turning off that system, that would make them vulnerable. Because at the moment, they're acting with impunity because their neighbours, they're almost completely invulnerable.
Well, they're not. I mean, you can't say that after October. I know you said almost, but obviously the vulnerability was on display on October the 7th, albeit that Biden has also said that the threat from Hamas, he said this on Friday, the threat from Hamas has been degraded to the point where they could not stage another attack, to which if you were Israeli, you'd respond by saying, all right, if that's true, then that is just for now. They've been degraded to a point where they can't stage another attack for now. Oh, man. I knew this was a tricky one, but it's actually almost too tricky to contemplate, isn't it? So but what Biden has done, according to one caller, is largely meaningless. But where we are now, according to another, is possibly on the brink of an absolutely unprecedented shift in relations. More of your calls on the way. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What does it mean now for Israel that Joe Biden has essentially said this war is only continuing, this carnage is only continuing because of Netanyahu's self-interest? And if Israel is completely alone on the world stage, and it pretty much is now, how would it end? Or what would happen next? Jenny Barsby's here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:32 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We will return to the Middle East shortly. It's an extraordinarily difficult question, actually. I hadn't fully realised when I asked it just what a sort of... I'm not stupid. I appreciate the broader context of the issue and indeed the region, but I hadn't fully appreciated what a can of worms these questions could open in the context of our own contemplations. But I want to return to an altogether milder but nonetheless very important can of worms, the different one first. I'm referring to this extraordinary episode in British politics whereby the Prime Minister has lied about the calculations they have attributed to the Labour Party, and the lie hinges upon the fact they've claimed the calculations had been undertaken by independent civil servants. The civil service has been having a tough time of it lately. A former Tory Prime Minister, Liz Truss, claimed that her disastrous administration was brought down by eco-zealots and trans-activists in the civil service, and I'm not sure she's taken seriously anywhere anymore. But the pattern seems to have been taken up by Rishi Sunak. Dave Penman is General Secretary of the FDA, the trade union that represents civil servants. And I was trying to think of people that would be interesting to talk to today, Dave. It struck me that you would probably be at the top of the list. So just broad response first to this extraordinary intervention from the Permanent Secretary at the Treasury.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite extraordinary because civil servants try to avoid getting involved in this sort of political spat. So the fact that the letter was sent in those terms in the first place is quite unusual. I mean, essentially, there are a couple of things here. Ministers are going around saying that the civil service is independent. It's not. The civil servant serves loyally the government of the day, whatever colour of government that is elected. It's bound by the Civil Service Code. It's impartial, but it serves the government of the day, and therefore it does what it's told in many ways. And when it comes to these issues, what happens is that ministers and special advisors look at opposition policies, say we are making these assumptions about opposition policies, and ask civil servants to do calculations based on them. So they're not in any way independent calculations. They're based on politically partial assumptions that civil servants have been asked to assess, and really, using them in this way and repeating the lie that they're independent just drags the civil service into a political row that it really doesn't need. And what's really disappointing, I think, is that 2 days ago that letter was sent from the Treasury Permanent Secretary. That letter would not have been sent without ministers knowing that it was going to be sent, and that the concerns were being expressed by the civil service at that point. And despite that, they've still continued, and including on the airwaves this morning, repeated this position of it being an independent assessment. So there's two things going on here. There's the use of the word independent, but also the involvement, the claim that civil servants were involved specifically in the production or presentation of the Conservative Party's document, Labour's Tax Rises. That's a lie as well. It is, because what they've done is they've done which they're obliged to do under the current rules. I mean, there's a big question of whether these rules should actually apply and whether civil servants should ever get involved in this. I mean, Labour have done it in the past as well, right? When they've been in government. But really, it's what they do is they calculate specific policies based on assumptions that ministers and special advisors have made. What the Conservatives have then done is they've taken that and added other things to it and presented it as a Conservative Party document. Wow. And then, as you say, fudging this issue about whether it's all been produced by civil servants or not. So they're clearly deliberately manipulating these points to try and make it look like this is an independent assessment of Labour Party's policies. And by doing so, contravening a number of issues in relation to their obligation as ministers about keeping the civil service impartial. They have an obligation under the Ministerial Code to protect the impartiality of the civil service. They are under an obligation to avoid this sort of row for civil servants, and yet they clearly are deliberately repeating those lies around how the document has been produced, and dodging this issue around the independence of the civil service.
So there's a case for arguing that Sunak and Claire Coutinho this morning have broken the Ministerial Code.
Absolutely. Every time a minister does something like this, where they create a challenge around the impartiality of the civil service, then essentially they are breaking the Ministerial Code. Now, the Ministerial Code is entirely in the remit of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is doing this as well, so nothing's going to happen about it. But it demonstrates the degree to which we really have become accustomed to this sort of behaviour from ministers. We're in the High Court tomorrow on a judicial review with the government over the Rwanda legislation, where on a very similar basis, they are asking civil servants to potentially break the law and breach the Civil Service Code. We're arguing that is unlawful, which is why we're at court around it. But we should never be there, because ministers should never create a situation where there's any doubt about this, that the public could look and see, be concerned about the impartiality of the civil service. It's really important for this government and future governments that people trust the impartiality of the civil service. And it's important that the civil service is able to serve this government, but also the next government, so that if a Labour do get elected, they can trust the civil service from day one to serve them loyally as they've served the previous administration.
Do you get a verdict tomorrow, Dave, on that case, or is it just a hearing?
No, it's unlikely.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, it could be, but I think it's likely the judgment will be reserved, and we'll hear it in the next few days.
Right. I was just thinking of our forward planning department. I was going to give them a quick heads up. Just to that other point, to the central point of this conversation, can you pinpoint when this ball started rolling? Because I think a lot of people listening will recognise the direction of traffic that you describe, and will also recognise how untraditional it is, or even perhaps unprecedented. And I think both of those words could apply to James Bowler's letter a couple of days ago, certainly to the fact of it becoming public. Was there a point at which you felt, as General Secretary of the FDA, that your members were under threats or under being put in a form of jeopardy by politicians that hadn't happened in previous governments, or are we just seeing perhaps new versions of practices that had always been in place before?
No, I mean, I've been General Secretary since 2012, and you always get government getting a bit annoyed about something, and ministers say something and they complain about civil servants, sometimes legitimately, sometimes illegitimately. But I think what we noticed around Brexit was when you had the Brexit referendum, the debate around it, you had those within the Conservative Party, but not necessarily in government, who were making these accusations about the civil service, about being politically partial, about proring and all of that. And of course, what ultimately happened was those forces then came into power, came into government. The very people who had been sitting on the back benches criticising the civil service and accusing it of acting partially then became ministers. And so the last 5 years have been absolutely extraordinary. I mean, you say this is an unprecedented event in terms of the letter from James Bowler's as Permanent Secretary writing to Labour about it. But, you know, what other unprecedented events have we seen? You know, we've seen a Permanent Secretary resign live on telly. We've seen the former Permanent Secretary of the Treasury sacked by Liz Truss. So, you know, there have been any number of instances. You know, we were at the High Court before because on the Ministerial Code when the Prime Minister refused to acknowledge the bullying of Priti Patel. So, you know, the last 5 years really have been quite extraordinary. But it started, to be honest, around that issue in Brexit. And what happened was, you know, Theresa May bears some responsibility for this because she didn't defend. The job of government is to defend the civil service. And she was trying to manage her own party at the time. And so this suddenly became an acceptable practice from a party of government to criticise and undermine the impartiality of the civil service. And it's just accelerated since then.
Because if they got impartial advice that they didn't like, they claimed that it was somehow motivated by bias, as opposed to, as I think in the case of Brexit, probably the events have borne this out, as opposed to reality. It was almost a form of reality denial when the job of the civil servant is to provide the ministers with reality.
Exactly. And ultimately, you know, people chose in the Brexit referendum. Yeah. Governments can choose. But actually, and that's the thing, civil service advise and say, look, these are the facts. They have an obligation under their code to present evidence to ministers. Ministers are free to ignore that. But what they can't do is pretend that it doesn't exist, or pretend actually that because it doesn't agree with their kind of worldview, that somehow it's been based on some partial evidence. They are happily ignore what advice from civil servants and make a decision, but it's on them. Yeah. And that's where you get into the difficulty, because they don't want it to be on them. They want to try and create some kind of consensus and pretend that somehow this isn't just their position and there isn't counter evidence around it, because ultimately they then are held personally accountable for those decisions. You talk to any civil servant and they'll talk about good ministers. I remember speaking to one about a minister who didn't necessarily have a good reputation publicly, but he said he was a really good minister to deal with because he listened patiently to the advice. He ignored it, but he was clear. Right?
Yeah, no, that's respect.
I'm going off and I'm doing the opposite,
yes.
right? And whether that was the right or wrong thing, the civil servant knew where they were because they'd advised the minister. The minister was clear about the decision they were taking and was prepared to be accountable for it. And that's all a civil servant wants, ultimately.
And finally, Dave Penman, if Rishi Sunak or Claire Coutinho or any other member of the government continues with these, as we've established, with these lies, this brace of lies, is there anything you can do? Are there any potential consequences on the horizon?
I mean, it's really difficult in an election period because government is going to make decisions. I mean, to be honest, I think this practice needs to end. It's, whoever's in power is going to be tempted to try and create this veneer of independence around this calculation that's made by Treasury officials, and ending that practice. Institute for Government have recommended that a number of months ago as well. And it's dealt with in different ways. This is not the only country that deals with this. In other countries, they have independent organisations that cost policies, and opposition parties can actually request that because it helps them assess their own policies coming into government. That sense of actually how can we create, both either in the civil service or in other independent institutions, an ability to support the transition of governments and help a better debate around policies and costings, but it takes a grown-up government to assess that and say we're going to spend some taxpayers' money, essentially assisting and helping opposition to do a better job for themselves. But that's in the public interest. So I think it's unlikely we'll be able to do anything between now and the election.
Sure.
We'll see how it goes today and whether they repeat it. And whether we try to take some action, maybe write to the Cabinet Secretary around it or try and do something, but it's unlikely at this point in time that anyone's going to pay any attention.
I hear you. I know I said it was my last question, but listening to you, I've just had a penny drop moment with regards to the last few governments from a civil service point of view. When they've been told something they don't like, they have accused the civil service of being impartial, but the same people in this news cycle are claiming that the civil service is independent when offering up findings that the civil service haven't even done.
Exactly. I mean,
but that's surreal, right?
Yeah, and the last time this happened was when Sue Gray was doing her investigation into Bartygate. They were all lining up to say how Sue Gray was independent and this was an independent report.
Yeah.
And I joked at the time that Francis Maud would be turning in his grave, because he used to go on about this all the time. He was his big bugbear when he came in as Minister for the Cabinet Office, saying the civil service is not independent, it serves the government of the day. And that is the case. Civil servants understand that, it's just a pity ministers don't.
Dave Penman, thank you very much indeed, General Secretary of the FDA. I know he's in the middle of a busy day, so particularly grateful to him for finding some time to talk to us today. After the next hiatus, we'll return to the question of what Joe Biden's latest criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu might mean, and if, as seems close to inevitable, Israel is soon completely isolated on the world stage, what on earth happens next? And indeed, how does the carnage in Gaza end? It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I'm sure there's PhD theses that have been written about it. I think that Dave Penman may have somewhat prematurely dispatched Francis Maud to the great Cabinet Office in the sky there. A couple of people pointing out he is indeed still with us, but I don't know whether Dave was referring to him no longer being in government. The sort of relationship between reportage and war, when you're not involved in the war. So, depending on your age, you'd probably think of the Falklands or the Gulf War, one of either or both of the Gulf Wars. The Falklands felt different, I think, because British people were besieged, if you like, or the battlefield was British. Technically, albeit that it was in the middle of the South Atlantic. So I don't know what the received wisdom is on the spotlight, the strength of the spotlight, the direction of the spotlight. I've been thinking about it more with regard to Ukraine, but I've noted today that it's very pertinent to coverage of the Middle East as well, because the killing is continuing, of course, in Gaza, and the support for the administration responsible for the killing has all but disappeared on the world stage. The first Signs of that came in UN votes and UN resolutions, but America always stood full square behind the Benjamin Netanyahu administration. That is no longer the case. It is now a matter of record that Joe Biden certainly thinks it possible that the only reason Netanyahu is still killing Palestinians is for his own political purposes, something which a lot of commentators have contended for quite some time, but which is, I mean, if you'd said a year ago or even 6 months ago that the President of the United States would take such a strong position against the Prime Minister of Israel, I don't think people would have believed you. So what does it mean? And if Israel does end up entirely isolated on the world stage, how does it end? How does the situation in Gaza end? Lisa is in Southampton. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James, I've been on before, and I think Biden had to do what he did. I'm very glad he did. I don't even think he could have done it a bit earlier. He's in a really, obviously we all know it's an election year, but his party is very split on this, and with the progressive wing of the party, they would have liked this done a few weeks ago, but I think he was getting all his ducks in a row. He wanted to see the strength of Hamas. He wanted to gauge the Israeli public opinion, which is turning on Netanyahu. It was awful even before October 7th.
Yes.
Remember the people in the streets?
Yes.
They wanted him out. He literally was hanging on. But because he's part of this right-wing coalition with the Likud movement, he literally is kind of trapped because he knows there are people in his own party that put him there that would like to see a one-state solution. They would like to see Palestine completely wiped off. The killing of the people that is happening now is so abhorrent to everyone. And I think other world leaders, I do think that they were much more keen to jump in more quickly because, one, they don't have a presidential election. So they don't have as much skin in the game. Because Britain and the United States both have elections this year, their opinions were very different, and I agree with Biden. I'm glad he did it. He's the only U.S. president in many decades that's actually gone to Israel.
Didn't Trump go?
No, he did not.
Oh, gosh, my bad. Sorry.
No, I don't think he did. I think he sent people, but again, Trump, I don't think Trump would have handled it like this at all, and I do think Biden is right to do what he did.
What does it mean then? I mean, the point, because either Netanyahu becomes, that old argument about it's better to be there to put a hand of caution on the shoulder of somebody whose actions you may disapprove of, or you cut the links entirely.
I don't think the links will be cut. I think Netanyahu may use this to his own advantage. He may say, look, this is our strongest ally. This country has always supported us.
Yeah.
I think we have to now, and I know as much as people will say this could be the opening for a negotiated settlement. And I know he said he will never negotiate with Hamas, but Biden may have just given him the opportunity to do so.
That's the best case scenario, and at best, it's what, about a 4 in 10 chance, a 5 in 10 chance?
Well, but it may be over the next few days, because I liked who you talked about the human rights leader who was a Holocaust survivor. I've taught history. We've had Holocaust survivors in our classrooms for our kids. It's very powerful when someone who escaped the genocide is now basically accusing his own countrymen, his own people of his own religion, of committing this genocide. The hypocrisy is unbelievable.
And those are his words and your words. They haven't been sort of sanctioned legally yet.
No, I know, but I mean, I've been to Israel several times, and I'm not Jewish, but I'm a Baha'i member of the Baha'i faith, and so I went on pilgrimage there. But I literally love the country, I love the people, and it just breaks my heart to see so many people dying because of one man's political career.
And that's the point, though, isn't it? Ultimately, I mean, it's the beginning and the end of the conversation, in a sense. But I think Trump did go to Israel, just for the record.
Are you sure?
May 2017, just to.
Oh, did he?
I thought one of us was misremembering, but I thought it was probably me. But no, that's just for the record.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
Hey, no problem.
Because that's when he was trying to make he wanted the capital to go to Jerusalem.
Yes.
and that caused a lot of...
Well, that's another, just while we're on the subject, that was to appease the evangelical Christians who think that when Judgment Day comes, all the Jews are going to be sent to hell anyway. So it was one of the maddest marriages of politics and religion that I'd ever come across, and goodness me, I've come across plenty. But the bit I don't quite follow you on or go with you on is for Netanyahu to step away from war is for him to almost step into handcuffs.
Well, yeah, and the thing is...
And that's why he won't do it.
But then we come right back to the whole thing of you had somebody on, or I think it was earlier, about young people not voting.
Yes.
My sons are in their 30s in London, and they are very politically active, but they said it's really hard on us, and it's hard on me. I've been alive since the 1950s, and I've seen politics change, but I am so tired of people making these decisions on people's lives purely for politics. It has got to end. When does it, we are always looking to see what will our political base say? What will they do? And we aren't making the decisions that are best for people anymore.
Conviction politics. And
it's gone.
Actually believing in something and acting accordingly.
It doesn't happen anymore because we're worried about sound bites. We're worried about what's going to be on Twitter or on
we're back to the debate, aren't we? We're back to the debate that unfolded on the telly last night. Lisa, I always enjoy talking to you. Thank you for finding some time to call today. It's just, I just squeeze in one more, I think, before Sheila time. Avid is in Hall Green in Birmingham. Avid, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Thank you for having me, James.
You're very welcome.
I just wanted to say, I mean, the thing is, I've got this fear that despite Biden saying that, he no longer thinks that Netanyahu's doing this for any, good reason, I feel like nothing's going to change. I mean, there's been so many UN resolutions against Israel. There's been so many times
but they're always ignoring those resolutions or defying those resolutions. It can only be done, I always felt, with America's complicity. And if that complicity is removed, then the game changes, perhaps.
Yeah, but even then, I think whatever's going to happen, Palestine's crippled at the moment, like completely crippled.
Well, the new ceasefire, stage 3 is reconstruction of the new plan that Biden has put together.
Yeah, but I don't believe they're actually going to go through with it. I mean, I feel like their issue is that they want to land grab almost, and I've seen so many videos on social media. I have to be careful, but there's been so many Israelis that have said that, as soon as these Palestinians have gone out, then we're going to go there and we're going to build our houses, and there's plans and there's auctions going on in the UK and America. I haven't got the provenance to comment on that, but we know that the process and the program of illegal settlements is well underway in the West Bank with the full support of people like Bezalel Smotrich. So exactly. You don't need to take me into territory where I don't feel confident of the facts. But then that begs. Well, actually, we've run out of time, so we'll leave that question hanging. It would have been a fairly extraordinary achievement if we'd arrived at a definitive answer to the question of what on earth happens next, if, as seems now pretty much the case, Benjamin Netanyahu is completely isolated from his historical allies. We will do this all again tomorrow morning from 10. Thank you for your attention today. If you missed any of the show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app. Tom Swarbrick, of course, will be with you at 4 o'clock today. And Sheila Fogarty is with you now.
James O'Brien on LBC.